Thank you so much, Dr. Bernardi, for a great talk. And I want to give you the coveted Cafe Sci mug. And we'll take questions from the audience at these two microphones here, and we'll alternate between the two and go from there.
Maybe I just had a momentary lapse of attention. So the fish larvae that are being eaten by the lionfish, was it?
That's right.
So they don't recognize the smell of the lionfish as predators because there's no evolutionary history, or because they've lost their sense of smell due to acidification?
The first one. I use this example as a way of showing what is very likely to happen in the future. But what is occurring right now is the fact that they don't recognize them as predators. What is puzzling, people have been studying that and have not been able to yet find any evidence of it, is that when you look at natural selection, a lot of people say, oh, natural selection is the survival of the fittest. It really is not exactly that. Most of the time in natural selection, it's not a matter of life or death. It's a matter of, are you going to have a little bit more offsprings or a little bit less offsprings? In this case, natural selection is a matter of life or death. It's one of the very few cases, actually. And people thought, well, you know, this is bad, but it's only a matter of time before we find larvae that just by chance can at least recognize the fact that these guys are ready to eat them or not. And people have looked very much into evidence of a change of behavior of the larvae that would show some evidence of predator avoidance, and so far no one has seen it. So, I mean, at some point, hopefully it will happen, but it's not, I think that they're just not equipped for it. So it is not happening yet. Yeah, that's very important. That's all right, I can hear you.
Both ways?
Okay.
And if it is one way, why is it that way?
Okay, that's very important. So the reason why Napoleon really did not pursue too much the opening of the Suez Canal is because when they did the calculations, they thought that the difference in seawater level between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean was very big, as it is, for example, between the Pacific and the Atlantic, and this is why there are so many levees in the Panama Canal. But the reality of it is that the difference in height is about only 1 meter. So the Red Sea is a little bit higher than the Mediterranean. That is part of the answer. A second part of the answer is that in the Red Sea, the ecological niches are overcrowded. There are 3,000 species of fish. There is only 500 in the Mediterranean. And lastly, it is easier to go to a saltier environment to a less salty environment than the opposite. So to specifically answer your question, there is one species of fish that has migrated the other way. It's called an anti-Lessepian species. And even that one is, some people are arguing if it's really a real case or not. So because of all these reasons, all the migrations go in one direction. Yeah.
I have two questions. First of all, the fistularia, wasn't it, that went into the Mediterranean?
Yes.
What are they doing? Are they, so that's one question. Are they eating all the food? Are they eating the larvae? And the second question refers to the lionfish. What is or are the larvae supposed to do to avoid predation? Because they're larvae. They're not exactly moving around on their own, so how could they avoid predation?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And what's the prognosis is the third question.
About fistularia. The first question was that what fistularia is doing, right? Was it the first question? Is this right? Yeah. Right. Fistularia usually, and in the Mediterranean as well, feeds on adult fishes, and that's what it does there. So it's not specific. It also feeds on larvae, but it mostly feeds on on adult fishes. I think that you mentioned something that made me want to talk about something else, and I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about it, and if it addresses your question, that's great, and if not, I'll just talk about it, is that you say, what is happening when they go there? One of the first species that was studied is called the rabbitfish. There are two species of rabbitfish that entered the Mediterranean from the Red Sea. These are herbivorous species. There is only two species of herbivores in the Mediterranean, and they're not super common. And in fact, they are the link between the algae and the upper levels in the trophic levels. So people, when they saw herbivores come in, they thought, wow, at last we have some herbivores that are going to be able to move the system around a lot faster. And in fact, they completely removed all the algae, particularly in Israel and in Lebanon and Syria. And the algae are food to urchins. The urchin collapsed, and when the urchin collapsed, the entire system collapsed. And so it took about 40, 50 years. So for 40 years, people have said biological invasions can be great. And all of a sudden, people say, oh, wow, we didn't look at into the long term. So I don't know why I thought about that, but I thought that it answered part of your question. About the lionfish, well, two things. First of all, you said that larvae don't do much. Actually, they do tons. Larvae can swim very well for a very, very long time. Some larvae can swim without ever stopping for 40 days. That is incredible. They are extremely motile. Unlike what people thought, that they were just drifting. They never drift. And another thing is, it depends. But they are adapted to their system. So, for example, in the tropic, wrasse larvae at night sleep under the sand. Some larvae sleep in the spines of urchins. Some larvae sleep in anemones. It really depends. It depends on what they are adapted to and what their predators are doing. In this case, those larvae, beautiful studies have been done by Mark Hickson and Mark Carr on how larvae are avoided both jacks and bottom predators. And that was before the lionfish. The lionfish is not doing any of these things. The lionfish is doing something totally different. So the lionfish are going there and eating larvae that are absolutely not suspecting anything. So they are simply not adapted to that. But yeah, I think that I would say just the opposite of what probably you are thinking, that everybody thinks actually, is that larvae do tons of stuff and they're very well adapted to avoid predation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So yeah,
I've heard of trying to get people to eat the lionfish. Is there any stopping it, or are we just going to have to wait it out to see what happens with all these lionfish?
The only way to eradicate, not to eradicate, you cannot eradicate, but to keep the population of lionfish at bay is probably by fishing it. And so right now there is a lot of websites that give you recipes on lionfish. There are things. I went to Cuba. My son very much likes to spearfish, and my daughter as well. And so everything was illegal to spearfish except lionfish. So they had a field day. They got tons of those. We brought them to the restaurant. We ate them. They are delicious. But that's probably the only thing that is somewhat going to keep the population at bay. There is no way we're going to eradicate them. They are, because there is no predator. People have been killing them and then feeding them to sharks to train sharks to eat lionfish. That's a great idea right there. And so they do that with a lot of tourists around. Now the sharks are harassing tourists. It's terrible. So I think that's one of the ways is to kill them. They did a little bit the same thing with crown of thorns starfish, which were very, very bad. And people started just killing them one by one. And in fact, it seems stupid, but it's a little something, actually. It does have an effect.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, let's thank Dr. Bernardi.
Thank you very
one more
much.
time. All right.